Now, the main point of what we are saying is this. We do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by a mere human being. Every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, and so it was necessary for this one also to have something to offer. If he were on earth, he would not be a priest, for there are already priests who offer the gifts prescribed by the law. They serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. See to it that you should make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. But in fact, the ministry Jesus has received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is mediator is superior to the old one, since the new covenant is established on better promises. For if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But God found fault with the people and said, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbors or say to one another, 'Know the Lord,' because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. By calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear."
My wife and I recently started an experiment. We decided that we would attempt to make our own bread. So we'd heard various stories about how it's so much better for you to make your own bread. And so we thought we'd try it out. And so a few weeks ago, we started. And we bought some proper bread flour, we got the dried yeast, we got the salt, the sugar, all the things you need to make bread. And I must say, it's been really good fun, just kneading dough every couple of evenings or so, just going there, just pummeling this dough. It's been really, really therapeutic. But after a couple of weeks, we're asking ourselves, has it made any difference? You hear all the horror stories about British bread, and we wondered, is it actually making any difference? And I think it's a really important question really to consider. Does being a Christian make any difference? Does being a Christian make any difference to my life? And I would hope that there were many people in this room who would say, yes, it makes all the difference. But deep down, do you wonder sometimes if God hears you? Do you wonder if there's something blocking your connection to him? I wonder, do you sometimes go through the Christian life wondering, am I doing it right? Am I doing life right here? Because life is hard. There are so many things that come up and crop up in life, and it's often very, very difficult to know whether you're making the right choices or not. And sometimes it's tempting to look around at the world and think, there are other things here. There are bits of wisdom here that I could use, that I could adopt, that would make my life easier. It's quite easy to look around and think this new thing could be really, really good. You see, we long for tangible things. We long for things that feel real. We want to do this and that and feel connected to God. It's one of the striking things about the Christian life. You might read a Bible passage once and it has a massive effect on you. You then read it a few weeks later and it does nothing. Or sometimes you do this particular thing and you feel really connected to God. And then times when, frankly, it doesn't really seem to make any difference to your life. We want to follow rules. We want to follow tangible principles and see real results. And often, sometimes, it can feel like Christianity doesn't immediately offer that. And in those moments, sometimes we can wonder, is there something better? For the original readers of this letter, they're asking, were we right the first time? The Hebrews were born Jewish. They'd grown up in the synagogues. They'd grown up hearing the Old Testament read week after week after week after week after week. They'd then come to know the Lord Jesus through the preaching of the gospel. And so they'd left the synagogue and they'd joined the local church. And now the Christian life is getting hard for them. There are challenges, there are difficulties. And they're wondering, were we right the first time? Were the old days better than today? Simon talked about getting nostalgia for the 1990s. They're having nostalgia for the synagogue. They're having nostalgia for those glory days when they had solid rules and solid rituals that made sense and seemed to be doing something. And so they're looking back on those glory days and asking, would it be better? And the author, who we've called Mr. Hebrews throughout this series, is saying no. Stick with Jesus. It is far, far better. And he sets up a comparison between two systems, if you like. There's what we'll call the Sinai system. That's the system set up at the Exodus. Do you remember the story of Moses, how he led the people out of Israel at Mount Sinai? They entered into a covenant with the living God and the Ten Commandments, and they had priests and a tabernacle, it became a temple. They had this whole system set up to connect to God. And he compares this system with the Jesus system, the system that was instituted at the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. And we see that they're radically different. They're different in how they say we know God. Sinai says through angels. The Jesus system says it's through him. They're different in who you follow. In Sinai, you follow Moses. But Christians follow Jesus. And they have different views on where and how we rest. In the Sinai system, it's in the Promised Land. It's in Jerusalem. You can plot it on a map. But in the Jesus system, we rest in him, in intimacy with him, wherever he is. And then they're different in how we reconnect to God. So in the Sinai system, you go through the Aaronic priests, the descendants of Aaron from the tribe of Levi. In the Jesus system, you go straight through him, the high priest. But here's the rub. Both systems come from the same God. Both the Sinai system and the Jesus system originate with the Lord. So did he change his mind? How did these two fit together? It can confuse us. And so much ink has been spilt over this question. I've read a small fraction of it. And it's one of the most common objections to Christianity, to the Bible. It's inconsistent. God does one thing in one bit and something very different in another bit. And to help us, Mr. Hebrews is going to continue his comparison by saying that Jesus does the ultimate ministry first, and then Jesus offers the ultimate covenant. So first, the ultimate ministry. And we see that in verses 1 to 5. And if you've missed Hebrews so far, Mr. Hebrews gives us the upshot of what he's said. Now, the main point of what we are saying is this. We do have such a high priest. Now, a high priest in the Bible is a bit like a filter, in that he filters out God's curse for sin by offering sacrifices, and then becomes a channel for God's blessing to pour on his people. And Aaron could only be in God's presence for a short time. But Jesus, on the other hand, verse 1, sat down at the right hand of the throne of majesty in heaven. Jesus could put his feet up in God's presence in a way that Aaron never could. Aaron served in an earthly tabernacle, a tent that moved until an earthly temple was built of stone in Jerusalem. But Jesus serves in the sanctuary, verse 2, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, and not by a mere human being. You see, in the Bible, there is another temple. There is a heavenly one that Jesus is in right now, working. The Sinai system saw sheep being sacrificed. And the Jesus system also has something to offer God, verse 3. And in chapter 9, we'll go on and we'll read and we'll see how that's from his own blood. That is shed on the cross. Jesus offers up himself as a sacrifice. But we're going to come back to that in future weeks. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. If he were on earth, he would not be a priest, for there are already priests who offer the gifts prescribed by the law. And so here we have two priests, two tabernacles, two temples, two sacrifices, both given by God. Did he change his mind? No. The Aaronic priest of the Sinai system serves as a sanctuary that is a copy and a shadow of what is in heaven. The system set up at Sinai is modeled on the system that would be set up by Jesus. Growing up, I used to go to Legoland quite often. I went much longer than I'd have wanted to because I had a lot of younger brothers. And so we used to go to Legoland, and you'd go there and you'd see these models. You'd see life-size Lego models of cars, you'd see a giant pirate ship, you'd see models of capital cities, you'd go and see Big Ben in miniature. I had a friend who took a dinosaur costume onesie along and so pretended to be Godzilla while he was walking around with all these Lego models. And when I was a bit older, I began to play with Lego Technic. This is like the kind of the slightly more nerdy Lego that you can build things like cars and engines and pistons and gears. You can do much more sophisticated stuff with Lego. And one of the things, and much of what I know about cars comes from that. The Lego models taught me how a steering column works, or roughly how a piston engine works. It taught me all of these things as I was building them. And much of what we know about the Jesus system comes from the Lego model of the Sinai system. And that is why we read the Old Testament. That is why we should be preaching through the Old Testament often, because it's like a little Lego model of the real thing. And we can learn things about Jesus through the copies and shadows throughout the Old Testament. You might be wondering, Melchizedek, Melchizehu, as Neil said last week, doesn't come up very much. But the Levite priests come up all the time. And the reason they come up all the time is because they show us what Jesus is like. And of course, any Lego model needs to be lifelike. There's no point having a Lego model of a car that looks nothing like a car. And that's why Moses was warned, verse 5, when he was about to build the tabernacle, see to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. It's one of the striking features of the book of Exodus. Most children's Bibles cover the first 15 chapters. But then there are 25 chapters afterwards that talk about the building of the tabernacle and the exact blueprints. And we needed the exact blueprints because they show us something of what Jesus' ministry is like. But of course, there is a massive difference between a Lego car and a real car. The Hebrews here, these Jewish Christians, are being tempted to go back to the Lego car when they have the real car that can actually go places. The priestly system was designed to connect people to God. And it's really, really tempting for us to find a different way of connecting to God other than the Lord Jesus Christ. The real ministry of Jesus is in a real tabernacle, a heavenly one. And it's so, so tempting for us to try and find a different way of connecting to God other than through Jesus. We need to stick with Jesus. As a church, as churches, we need to stick with Jesus constantly because he is how we connect with God. As individuals, we need to connect with Jesus because he is the way we connect with God. We need to be people who are Jesus people, not simply God people. Jesus offers the ultimate ministry. But verse 6 tells us that not only does he have a superior ministry, but he also has a superior covenant, an ultimate covenant. Now, just a quick jargon buster. Covenant's not really a word we come across today very much. It basically is a deep, binding relationship between two parties, and they're established on promises. So probably the most straightforward analogy I can give is marriage. A lot of us in here in this room are married. That's a covenant, a set of binding promises between two parties. And in the Bible, God makes covenants. He enters binding relationships by making promises. And he does it through a mediator, a middleman, a representative. And we're told that the covenant Jesus offers is superior to the old one, since the new covenant is established on better promises. Now, the covenant God made at Sinai was good. God never does anything bad. But it had a problem built into it. It had a flaw because it depended on human beings to obey it. And here it is. God found fault with the people and said, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant," that's the Jesus one, "with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them, declares the Lord." The Sinai system, and others like it, depend on me and you to get it right. There are clauses built into it that mean we have to get it right in our response to it. But the problem is we don't. None of us do it. And the Sinai covenant shows us that. It's an impossible covenant to keep. And so it shows us just how deep our problem is. The problem is not a bad education. It's not bad life experiences. The problem facing this world is not economic injustice. It's not oppression. It's not a list of all other things. The biggest problem in this world is in the human heart. And so we need work to be done on a deep level, an incredibly deep level that the Sinai covenant doesn't even go far enough. It can tell us what to do, but it's not going to make us actually do it. God knew this, and as the Sinai system imploded in the prophet Jeremiah's day, he promised a better covenant, a better relationship, one that was based entirely on him and his work, and not our own. "This is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time," declares the Lord. "I will put my laws in their heart, on their minds, and write them on their hearts." He's going to do the deep work that he'd never done before in human history. He was going to make human beings want to obey his law on a heart level. God's law, by the way, is to love him, and from that love to overflow in love with other people. And we cannot drum up that love for God ourselves. We can't. And we're too fickle. We change too much. I can wake up one day in a really good mood and then end the day in a really bad mood. I can feel really faithful 1 hour and then the next hour be incredibly unfaithful. I will say one thing and do another. I can guarantee I will say one thing today and do something completely different tomorrow. Because we all change, we're all fickle. And the Sinai covenant shows us that. The Sinai system demonstrates that. In fact, any system we set up to connect with God does that. We're too fickle. Every New Year's resolution fails. I made a few this year. They didn't last January. And we're in April, and I'm regretting it. But God is going to make us, God is going to help us love him. He promises to woo us, to win our hearts, to make us want to live for him. And it leads to a deep intimacy. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. In the old days, under the Sinai covenant, people didn't particularly have a close relationship with God. There'd be a few people that would. Moses, Joshua, David, some of the Old Testament heroes perhaps. But not many people actually enjoyed intimacy with God. Not many people personally knew God. But under the Jesus system, anyone, whoever you are, whether you are the least or the greatest, whether you are the greatest spiritual athlete or the biggest failure, you can come to know God for yourself. You can relate to him yourself. Not because of anything you've done, but because of what he's done. He promises to write the law on your hearts. And that will make you live for him. There are some people here tonight who might not be Christians. There's quite a lot of people in this room. Tonight is your opportunity. You can come to know the living God, the one who made everything, the one who's willing to do all of the work to bring you to him, into intimacy, into deep relationship with him. He's willing to do it. So will you trust him? Will you let him do that work in your heart? How is this possible? Under the ultimate covenant, God says, I will forgive their wickedness, and I will remember their sins no more. God chooses not to remember what we've done. I, for one, am very grateful for that. There are many things that I have done that I'm not proud of. There are many things I've done that I'm deeply ashamed of. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one here. Jesus' death on the cross means that God does not hold a grudge against us. He's not bitter. He's not resentful. He's completely and utterly forgiving. Willing to forget all the times we reject him, all the times we betray him. No other covenant, no other system but the Jesus system can do that. No other system can bring us into the presence of the living God. No other system can do this. The writer of the Hebrews Mr. Hebrews wants us to understand that there is no other way by which we can come to know God. There is no other system we can adopt, no other way that we can know God. In our moment, there are so many ideas, so many ways of how we can live our lives, so many ways of how we can connect with the spiritual. But Mr. Hebrews is very clear. It's through Jesus. It's through his system. And in fact, all other systems disappear over time. The Sinai system seemed front and foremost in the first century. There were synagogues all over the ancient world. The temple was one of the wonders of the ancient world. A glorious thing. I was trying to describe it to kids in Head Start this morning, and they just couldn't picture it. This enormous building just filled with gold, with temples and priests in rich costumes, going in offering sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice. And where is it now? It's all gone, isn't it? The Sinai system aged. It became obsolete and so disappeared. Our history books tell us that. AD 70, the soon-to-be Emperor Titus comes and destroys Jerusalem and the temple because it was no longer needed. There was an ultimate temple, an ultimate priest, and an ultimate sacrifice that replaced it. And whatever system we adopt in the place of Jesus will die, and us along with it. So we really need this Jesus system. There is no other way. And it brings about genuine change. The covenant is there to bring about change. Christianity makes all the difference in our lives. It makes an enormous difference to our lives. It enables us to connect with the living God. And it also enables us to genuinely, deeply change on a heart level. And so Mr. Hebrews says to us, keep going with Jesus. Don't swap it out. Don't swap him out for anything else. And when we do swap him out, there is forgiveness. There is deep forgiveness.